At his palace, Theseus, Duke of Athens, and Hippolyta, his fiancée, discuss their wedding, to be held in 4 days, under the new moon. Impatient for the event and in a celebratory mood, Theseus orders Philostrate, his master of the revels, to stir up the Athenian youth to merriments and devise entertainments with which the couple might pass the time until their wedding. 2:12. Philostrate takes his leave, and Theseus promises Hippolyta that though he wooed her with his sword, Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, presumably met Theseus in combat, he will wed her with pomp, with triumph, and with reveling, with a grand celebration to begin at once and last until the wedding. 2:19. Egus, a citizen of Athens, strides into the room, followed by his daughter Hermia and the Athenian youths Lysander and Demetrius. Egus has come to see Theseus with a complaint against his daughter, although Egus has promised her in marriage to Demetrius, who loves her. Lysander has won Hermia's heart, and Hermia refuses to obey her father and marry Demetrius. Egus demands that the law punish Hermia if she fails to comply with his demands. Theseus speaks to Hermia sharply, telling her to expect to be sent to a nunnery or put to death. Lysander interrupts, accusing Demetrius of being fickle in love, saying that he was once engaged to Hermia's friend Helena but abandoned her after he met Hermia. Theseus admits that he has heard this story, and he takes Egus and Demetrius aside to discuss it. Before they go, he orders Hermia to take the time remaining before his marriage to Hippolyta to make up her mind. Theseus, Hippolyta, Egus, and Demetrius depart, leaving Hermia alone with Lysander. Hermia and Lysander discuss the trials that must be faced by those who are in love. The course of true love never did run smooth, Lysander says. 134. He proposes a plan. He has an aunt, wealthy and childless, who lives 7 leagues from Athens and who dotes on Lysander like a son. At her house, Hermia and Lysander can be married and, because the manor is outside of Athens, they would be free from Athenian law. Hermia is overjoyed, and they agree to travel to the house the following night. Helena, Hermia's friend whom Demetrius jilted, enters the room, Levesic and deeply melancholy because Demetrius no longer loves her. Hermia and Lysander confide their plan to her and wish her luck with Demetrius. They depart to prepare for the following night's journey. Helena remarks to herself that she envies them their happiness. She thinks up a plan. If she tells Demetrius of the elopement that Lysander and Hermia are planning, he will be bound to follow them to the woods to try to stop them. If she then follows him into the woods, she might have a chance to win back his love. From the outset, Shakespeare subtly portrays the lovers as a group out of balance, a motif that creates tension throughout the play. For the sake of symmetry, the audience wants the 4 lovers to form 2 couples. Instead, both men love Hermia, leaving Helena out of the equation. The women are thus in non-parallel situations, adding to the sense of structural imbalance. By establishing the fact that Demetrius once loved Helena, Shakespeare suggests the possibility of a harmonious resolution to this love tangle. If Demetrius could only be made to love Helena again, then all would be well. By the end of the play, the fairies' intervention affects just such an outcome, and all does become well, though it is worth noting that the restoration of Demetrius's love for Helena is the result of magic rather than a natural reawakening of his feelings. The genre of comedy surrounding the Athenian lovers is farce, in which the humor stems from exaggerated characters trying to find their way out of ludicrous situations. Shakespeare portrays the lovers as overly serious, as each is deeply and earnestly preoccupied with his or her own feelings. Helena is anxious about her looks, reacting awkwardly when Lysander calls her fair. Hermia later becomes self-conscious about her short stature. Demetrius is willing to see Hermia executed to prevent her from marrying another man. And Lysander seems to have cast himself as the hero of a great love story in his own mind. 3.ii.188, 3.ii.247. Hermia is stubborn and quarrelsome, while Helena lacks self-confidence and believes that other people mock her. The airy world of the fairies and the absurd predicaments in which the lovers find themselves once in the forest make light of the lovers' grave concerns. In another part of Athens, far from Theseus's palace, a group of common laborers meets at the house of Peter Quince to rehearse a play that the men hope to perform for the grand celebration preceding the wedding of Theseus and Hippolyta. Quince, a carpenter, tries to conduct the meeting, but the talkative weaver Nick Bottom continually interrupts him with advice and direction. Quince tells the group what play they are to perform: the most lamentable comedy and most cruel death of Paramus and Thisbe, which tells the story of two lovers, separated by their parents' feud, who speak to each other at night through a hole in a wall. In the play, a lion surprises Thisbe one night and tatters her mantle before she escapes. When Paramus finds the shredded garment, he assumes that the lion has killed Thisbe. Stricken with grief, he commits suicide. When Thisbe finds Paramus's bloody corpse, she too commits suicide. Quince assigns their parts. Bottom is to play Paramus. Francis Flute, Thisbe. Robin Starveling, Thisbe's mother. Tom Snout, Paramus's father. Quince himself, Thisbe's father. And Snug, the lion. As Quince doles out the parts, Bottom often interrupts, announcing that he should be the one to play the assigned part. He says that his ability to speak in a woman's voice would make him a wonderful Thisbe, and that his ability to roar would make him a wonderful lion. Quince eventually convinces him that Paramus is the part for him, by virtue of the fact that Paramus is supposed to be very handsome. Snug worries that he will be unable to learn the lion's part, but Quince reassures him that it will be very easy to learn, since the lion speaks no words and only growls and roars. This worries the craftsman, who reason that if the lion frightens any of the noble ladies in the audience, they will all be executed. Since they are only common laborers, they do not want to risk upsetting powerful people. Bottom says that he could roar as sweetly as a nightingale so as not to frighten anyone, but Quince again convinces him that he can only play Paramus. The group disperses, agreeing to meet in the woods the following night to rehearse their play. The most important motif in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and one of the most important literary techniques Shakespeare uses throughout the play, is that of contrast. The three main groups of characters are all vastly different from one another, and the styles, moods, and structures of their respective subplots also differ. It is by incorporating these contrasting realms into a single story that Shakespeare creates the play's dreamlike atmosphere. Almost diametrically opposite the beautiful, serious, and love-struck young nobles are the clumsy, ridiculous, and deeply confused craftsmen, around whom many of the play's most comical scenes are centered. Where the young lovers are graceful and well-spoken, almost comically well-suited to their roles as melodramatically passionate youths, the craftsmen often fumble their words and could not be less well-suited for acting. This disjunction reveals itself as it becomes readily apparent that the craftsmen have no idea how to put on a dramatic production. Their speeches are full of impossible ideas and mistakes. Bottom, for example, claims that he will roar as gently as any sucking dove. Their concerns about their parts are absurd. Flute does not want to play Thisbe because he is growing a beard. And their extended discussion about whether they will be executed if the lion's roaring frightens the ladies further evidences the fact that their primary concern is with themselves, not their art. II.I.67-68 The fact that the workmen have chosen to perform the Paramus and Thisbe story, a Babylonian myth familiar to Shakespeare's audiences from Ovid's Metamorphoses, only heightens the comedy. The story of Paramus and Thisbe is highly dramatic, with suicides and tragically wasted love, themes that Shakespeare takes up in Romeo and Juliet as well. Badly suited to their task and inexperienced, although endlessly well-meaning, the craftsmen are sympathetic figures even when the audience laughs at them, a fact made explicit in Act V, when Theseus makes fun of their play even as he honors their effort. The contrast between the serious nature of the play and the bumbling foolishness of the craftsmen makes the endeavor all the more ridiculous. Further, the actor's botched telling of the youthful love between Paramus and Thisbe implicitly mocks the melodramatic love tangle of Hermia, Helena, Demetrius, and Lysander. In the forest, two fairies, one a servant of Titania, the other a servant of Oberon, meet by chance in a glade. Oberon's servant tells Titania's to be sure to keep Titania out of Oberon's sight, for the two are very angry with each other. Titania, he says, has taken a little Indian prince as her attendant, and the boy is so beautiful that Oberon wishes to make him his knight. Titania, however, refuses to give the boy up. Titania's servant is delighted to recognize Oberon's servant as Robin Goodfellow, better known as Puck, a mischievous sprite notorious for his pranks and jests. Puck admits his identity and describes some of the tricks he plays on mortals. The two are interrupted when Oberon enters from one side of the glade, followed by a train of attendants. At the same moment, Titania enters from the other side of the glade, followed by her own train. The two fairy royals confront one another, each questioning the other's motive for coming so near to Athens just before the marriage of Theseus and Hippolyta. Titania accuses Oberon of loving Hippolyta and of thus wishing to bless the marriage. Oberon accuses Titania of loving Theseus. The conversation turns to the little Indian boy, whom Oberon asks Titania to give him. But Titania responds that the boy's mother was a devotee of hers before she died. In honor of his mother's memory, Titania will hold the boy near to her. She invites Oberon to go with her to dance in a fairy round and see her nightly revels, but Oberon declines, saying that they will be at odds until she gives him the boy. Titania storms away, and Oberon vows to take revenge on her before the night is out. He sends Puck to seek a white and purple flower called Love and Idleness, which was once hit with one of Cupid's arrows. He says that the flower's juice, if rubbed on a sleeper's eyelids, will cause a sleeper to fall in love with the first living thing he or she sees upon waking. Oberon announces that he will use this juice on Titania, hoping that she will fall in love with some ridiculous creature. He will then refuse to lift the juice's effect until she yields the Indian prince to him. Act 2 serves two main functions. It introduces the fairies and their realm, and it initiates the romantic confusion that will eventually help restore the balance of love. The fairies, whom Shakespeare bases heavily on characters familiar from English folklore, are among the most memorable and delightful characters in the play. They speak in lilting rhymes infused with gorgeous poetic imagery. A Midsummer Night's Dream is a play dominated by the presence of doubles, and the fairies are designed to contrast heavily with the young lovers and the craftsmen. Whereas the lovers are earnest and serious, Puck and the other pixies are merry and full of laughter. Whereas the craftsmen are bumbling, earthy, and engage in methodical labor, the fairies are delicate, airy, and indulge in effortless magic and enchantment. The conflict between Oberon and Titania imports into the fairy realm the motif of love being out of balance. As with the Athenian lovers, the eventual resolution of the tension between the two occurs only by means of magic. Though the craftsmen do not experience romantic confusion about one another, Bottom becomes involved in an accidental romance with Titania in Act 3, and in Act V2 craftsmen portray the lovers Paramus and Thisbe, who commit suicide after misinterpreting events. As Puck flies off to seek the flower, Demetrius and Helena pass through the glade. Oberon makes himself invisible so that he can watch and hear them. Demetrius harangues Helena, saying that he does not love her, does not want to see her, and wishes that she would stop following him immediately. He curses Lysander and Hermia, whom he is pursuing, hoping to prevent their marriage and slay Lysander. Helena repeatedly declares her adoration for, and loyalty to, Demetrius, who repeatedly insults her. They exit the grove, with Helena following closely behind Demetrius, and Oberon materializes. He declares that before the night is out, Demetrius will be the one chasing Helena. Puck appears, carrying the flower whose juice will serve as the love potion. Oberon takes the flower and says that he knows of a fragrant stream bank surrounded with flowers where Titania often sleeps. Before hurrying away to anoint Titania's eyelids with the flower's juice, Oberon orders Puck to look for an Athenian youth being pursued by a lady and to put some of the juice on the disdainful youth's eyelids, so that when he wakes he will fall in love with the lady. He informs Puck that he will know the youth by his Athenian garb. Puck agrees to carry out his master's wishes. After her dancing and revelry, Titania falls asleep by the stream bank. Oberon creeps up on her and squeezes the flower's juice onto her eyelids, chanting a spell, so that Titania will fall in love with the first creature she sees upon waking. Oberon departs, and Lysander and Hermia wander into the glade. Lysander admits that he has forgotten the way to his aunt's house and says that they should sleep in the forest until morning, when they can find their way by daylight. Lysander wishes to sleep close to Hermia, but she insists that they sleep apart, to respect custom and propriety. At some distance from each other, they fall asleep. Puck enters, complaining that he has looked everywhere but cannot find an Athenian youth and pursuing lady. He is relieved when he finally happens upon the sleeping forms of Lysander and Hermia, assuming that they are the Athenians of whom Oberon spoke. Noticing that the two are sleeping apart, Puck surmises that the youth refused to let Hermia come closer to him. Calling him a churl, Puck spreads the potion on Lysander's eyelids, and he departs. Simultaneously, Helena pursues Demetrius through the glade. He insults her again and insists that she no longer follow him. She complains that she is afraid of the dark, but he nonetheless storms off without her. Saying that she is out of breath, Helena remains behind, bemoaning her unrequited love. She sees the sleeping Lysander and wakes him up. The potion takes effect, and Lysander falls deeply in love with Helena. He begins to praise her beauty and to declare his undying passion for her. Disbelieving, Helena reminds him that he loves Hermia. He declares that Hermia is nothing to him. Helena believes that Lysander is making fun of her, and she grows angry. She leaves in a huff, and Lysander follows after her. Hermia soon wakes and is shocked to find that Lysander is gone. She stumbles into the woods to find him. Act 2, Scene 2 introduces the plot device of the love potion, which Shakespeare uses to explore the comic possibilities inherent in the motif of love out of balance. Oberon's meddling in the affairs of humans further disrupts the love equilibrium, and the love potion symbolizes the fact that the lovers themselves will not reason out their dilemmas. Rather, an outside force magic will resolve the love tangle. The craftsmen meet in the woods at the appointed time to rehearse their play. Since they will be performing in front of a large group of nobles, and since they have an exaggerated sense of the delicacy of noble ladies, Bottom declares that certain elements of the play must be changed. He fears that Paramus's suicide and the lion's roaring will frighten the ladies and lead to the actors' executions. The other men share Bottom's concern, and they decide to write a prologue explaining that the lion is not really a lion nor the sword really a sword, and assuring the ladies that no one will really die. They decide also that, to clarify the fact that the story takes place at night and that Paramus and Thisbe are separated by a wall, one man must play the wall and another the moonlight by carrying a bush and a lantern. As the craftsmen rehearse, Puck enters and marvels at the scene of the hempen homospuns trying to act 3.I.65. When Bottom steps aside, temporarily out of view of the other craftsmen, Puck transforms Bottom's head into that of an ass. When the ass-headed Bottom re-enters the scene, the other men become terrified and run for their lives. Delighting in the mischief, Puck chases after them. Bottom, perplexed, remains behind. In the same grove, the sleeping Titania wakes. When she sees Bottom, the flower juice on her eyelids works its magic, and she falls deeply and instantly in love with the ass-headed weaver. She insists that he remain with her, embraces him, and appoints a group of fairies Peas Blossom, Cobweb, Moat, and Mustard Seed to see to his every wish. Bottom takes these events in stride, having no notion that his head has been replaced with that of an ass. He comments that his friends have acted like asses in leaving him, and he introduces himself to the fairies. Titania looks on him with undisguised love as he follows her to her forest bower. The structure of A Midsummer Night's Dream is roughly such that Act I introduces the main characters and the conflict. Act II sets up the interaction among the Athenian lovers, the fairies, and the craftsmen. The lovers wander through the forest, the fairies make mischief with the love potion, and Act III develops the comical possibilities of these interactions. As Act III is the first act in which all three groups appear, the fantastic contrasts between them are at their most visible. The craftsman's attempt at drama is a comedy of incongruity, as the rough, unsophisticated men demonstrate their utter inability to conceive a competent theatrical production. Their proposal to let the audience know that it is night by having a character play the role of moonshine exemplifies their straightforward, literal manner of thinking and their lack of regard for subtlety. In their earthy and practical natures, the craftsmen stand in stark contrast to the airy and impish fairies. The fairies' magic is one of the main components of the dreamlike atmosphere of A Midsummer Night's Dream, and it is integral to the plot's progression. It throws love increasingly out of balance and brings the farce into its most frenzied state. With the youth's love tangle already affected by the potion, Shakespeare creates further havoc by generating a romance across groups, as Titania falls in love with the ass-headed Bottom. Obviously, the delicate fairy queen is dramatically unsuited to the clumsy, monstrous craftsman. Shakespeare develops this romance with fantastic aplomb and heightens the comedy of the incongruity by making Bottom fully unaware of his transformed state. Rather, Bottom is so self-confident that he finds it fairly unremarkable that the beautiful fairy queen should wish desperately to become his lover. Further, his ironic reference to his colleagues as asses and his hunger for hay emphasize the ridiculousness of his lofty self-estimation. In another part of the forest, Puck tells Oberon about the predicament involving Titania and Bottom. Oberon is delighted that his plan is working so well. Hermia, having discovered Demetrius after losing Lysander, enters the clearing with Demetrius. Puck is surprised to see the woman he saw earlier with a different man from the one he enchanted. Oberon is surprised to see the man he ordered Puck to enchant with a different woman. He realizes that a mistake has been made and says that he and Puck will have to remedy it. Hermia presses Demetrius about Lysander's whereabouts, fearing that he is dead, But Demetrius does not know where Lysander has gone, and he is bitter and reproachful that Hermia would rather be with Lysander than with him. Hermia grows angrier and angrier, and Demetrius decides that it is pointless to follow her. He lies down and falls asleep, and Hermia stalks away to find Lysander. When Hermia is gone, Oberon sends Puck to find Helena and squeezes the flower juice onto Demetrius's eyelids. Puck quickly returns, saying that Helena is close behind him. Helena enters with Lysander still pledging his undying love to her. Still believing that he is mocking her, Helena remains angry and hurt. The noise of their bickering wakes Demetrius, who sees Helena and immediately falls in love with her. Demetrius joins Lysander in declaring this love. Lysander argues that Demetrius does not really love Helena. Demetrius argues that Lysander is truly in love with Hermia. Helena believes that they are both mocking her and refuses to believe that either one loves her. Hermia re-enters, having heard Lysander from a distance. When she learns that her beloved Lysander now claims to love Helena, as does Demetrius, she is appalled and incredulous. Helena, who is likewise unable to fathom that both men could be in love with her, assumes that Hermia is involved in the joke that she believes the men are playing on her, and she chides Hermia furiously for treating their friendship so lightly. Lysander and Demetrius are ready to fight one another for Helena's love. As they lunge at one another, Hermia holds Lysander back, provoking his scorn and disgust. "I will shake thee from me like a serpent." 3.ii.262. Hermia begins to suspect that Helena has somehow acted to steal Lysander's love from her, and she surmises that, because she is short and Helena is tall, Helena must have used her height to lure Lysander. She grows furious with Helena and threatens to scratch out her eyes. Helena becomes afraid, saying that Hermia was always much quicker than she to fight. Demetrius and Lysander vow to protect Helena from Hermia, but they quickly become angry with each other and storm off into the forest to have a duel. Helena runs away from Hermia, and Hermia, renouncing her amazement at the turn of events, departs. Oberon dispatches Puck to prevent Lysander and Demetrius from fighting and says that they must resolve this confusion by morning. Puck flies through the forest hurling insults in the voices of both Lysander and Demetrius, confusing the would-be combatants until they are hopelessly lost. Eventually, all four of the young Athenian lovers wander back separately into the glade and fall asleep. Puck squeezes the love potion onto Lysander's eyelids, declaring that in the morning all will be well. The confusion in Act 3 continues to heighten, as the Athenian lovers and the fairies occupy the stage simultaneously, often without seeing each other. The comedy is at its silliest, and the characters are at their most extreme. Helena and Hermia nearly come to blows as a result of their physical insecurities, and Lysander and Demetrius actually try to have a duel. The plot is at its most chaotic, and, though there is no real climax in A Midsummer Night's Dream, the action is at its most intense. With the falling action of Acts IV and V, however, matters will sort themselves out quickly and order will be restored. As the Athenian lovers lie asleep in the grove, Titania enters with Bottom, still with the head of an ass, and their fairy-attendants. Titania tells Bottom to lie down with his head in her lap, so that she may twine roses into his hair and kiss his fair large ears. IV.I.4. Bottom orders Peas Blossom to scratch his head and sends Cobweb to find him some honey. Titania asks Bottom if he is hungry, and he replies that he has a strange appetite for hay. Titania suggests that she send a fairy to fetch him nuts from a squirrel's hoard, but Bottom says that he would rather have a handful of dried peas. Yawning, he declares that he is very tired. Titania tells him to sleep in her arms, and she sends the fairies away, Gazing at Bottom's head, she cries, "Oh, how I love thee, how I dote on thee." And they fall asleep. IV.I.42. Puck and Oberon enter the glade and comment on the success of Oberon's revenge. Oberon says that he saw Titania earlier in the woods and taunted her about her love for the ass-headed Bottom. He asked her for the Indian child, promising to undo the spell if she would yield him, to which she consented. Satisfied, Oberon bends over the sleeping Titania and speaks the charm to undo the love potion. Titania wakes and is amazed to find that she is sleeping with the donkey-like Bottom. Oberon calls for music and takes his queen away to dance. She says that she hears the morning lark, and they exit. Puck speaks a charm over Bottom to restore his normal head, and he follows after his master. As dawn breaks, Theseus, his attendants, Hippolyta, and a goose enter to hear the baying of Theseus's hounds. They are startled to find the Athenian youth sleeping in the glade. They wake them and demand their story, which the youths are only partly able to recall to them. The previous night seems as insubstantial as a dream. All that is clear to them is that Demetrius and Helena love each other, as do Lysander and Hermia. Theseus orders them to follow him to the temple for a great wedding feast. As they leave, Bottom wakes. He says that he has had a wondrous dream and that he will have Peter Quince write a ballad of his dream to perform at the end of their play. Barely 300 lines long, Act IV is the shortest and most transitional of A Midsummer Night's Dream's 5 acts. The first 3 serve respectively to introduce the characters, establish the comic situation, and develop the comedy. Act IV ends the conflict and leads to the happy ending in Act V. What is most remarkable, perhaps, is the speed with which the conflict is resolved and the farce comes to an end. Despite the ubiquity of chaos in Act III, all that is necessary to resolve matters is a bit of potion on Lysander's eyelids and Oberon's forgiveness of his wife. The climactic moment between Titania and Oberon, during which she agrees to give him the Indian boy, is not even shown on stage but is merely described. Though Demetrius's love of Helena is a byproduct of the magic potion rather than an expression of his natural feelings, love has been put into balance, allowing for a traditional marriage ending. As is often the case with Shakespeare, the dramatic situation is closely tied to the circumstances of the external environment. Just as a conflict is ending and a semblance of order is restored among the characters, the sun comes up. There is no real climax in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Rather, as soon as the scenario has progressed to a suitable degree of complication and hilarity, Shakespeare simply invokes the fairies' magic to dispel all conflict. As the sun comes up, the reappearance of Theseus and Hippolyta, who symbolize the power and structure of the outside world, begins to dispel the magical dream of the play. Theseus and Hippolyta bookend the play. They are extremely important figures both at its beginning and at its end, but they disappear entirely during the main action in the magical forest. The Duke and his Amazon bride are romanticized in the play, but they belong solely to the non-magical waking world, where they remain wholly in control of their own feelings and actions. An important element of the dream realm, as the lovers come to realize upon waking in a daze, is that one is in control of neither oneself nor one's surroundings. In this way, the forest and fairies contribute to the lover's sense of their experience as a dream, even though the action happens largely while they are awake. At Quince's house, the craftsmen sit somberly and worry about their missing friend Bottom. Having last seen him shortly before the appearance of the ass-headed monster in the forest, the craftsmen worry that he has been felled by this terrifying creature. Startling suspects that the fairies have cast some enchantment on Bottom. Flute asks whether they will go through with the play if Bottom does not return from the woods, and Peter Quince declares that to do so would be impossible, as Bottom is the only man in Athens capable of portraying Paramus. The sad craftsmen agree that their friend is the wittiest, most intelligent, and best person in all of Athens. Snug enters with an alarming piece of news. Theseus has been married, along with 2 or 3 lords and ladies, presumably Lysander, Hermia, Demetrius, and Helena, and the newlyweds are eager to see a play. IV.II.16. Flute laments Bottom's absence, noting that Bottom would certainly have won a great deal of money from the admiring Duke for his portrayal of Paramus. Just then, Bottom bursts triumphantly into the room and asks why everyone looks so sad. The men are overjoyed to see him, and he declares that he has an amazing story to tell them about his adventure in the forest. Quince asks to hear it, but Bottom says that there is no time. They must don their costumes and go straight to the Duke's palace to perform their play. As they leave, Bottom tells them not to eat onions or garlic before the play, as they must be prepared to utter sweet breath. IV.II.36. This brief comic scene returns the focus of the play to the subplot of the Athenian craftsman. Structurally, Act IV, Scene 2 represents something of a new beginning for A Midsummer Night's Dream. The main conflict of the play has been resolved, but rather than ending with the weddings of the lovers, as is customary in an Elizabethan comedy, the weddings do not even occur on stage here. Shakespeare chooses to include an extended epilogue devoted to sheer comedy. The epilogue takes up all of Act V and centers around the craftsman's performance of Paramus and this before the Athenian crowd. Act IV, Scene 2 transfers the focus of the play from magic and unbalanced love to a play within a play, in which the themes of A Midsummer Night's Dream, not too heavy to begin with, are recycled into a form so ridiculous and garbled that the play draws to a wholly untroubled conclusion. Though the preceding events of A Midsummer Night's Dream have been far from tragic, many of the characters have experienced unpleasant emotions, such as jealousy, lovesickness, and insecurity. Act IV, Scene 2 makes a basic transition from sadness to joy as Bottom's return transforms his fellow craftsmen's sorrow and confusion into delight and eagerness. It is no coincidence that Bottom's reappearance occurs almost simultaneously with the audience being told that the lovers have been married. Just as the marriages dispel the romantic angst of the play, so does Bottom's return dispel the worry of his comrades. Similarly, the arrival in the forest of Theseus and Hippolyta, representatives of order, coincides with the Athenian lovers waking from their chaotic, dreamlike romp of the previous night. At his palace, Theseus speaks with Hippolyta about the story that the Athenian youths have told them concerning the magical romantic mix-ups of the previous night. Theseus says that he does not believe the story, adding that darkness and love have a way of exciting the imagination. Hippolyta notes, however, that if their story is not true, then it is quite strange that all of the lovers manage to narrate the events in exactly the same way. The youths enter and Theseus greets them heartily. He says that they should pass the time before bed with a performance, and he summons a goose, or, in some editions of A Midsummer Night's Dream, Philostrate, to read him a list of plays, each of which Theseus deems unacceptable. Aegus then tells him of the Paramus and Thisbe story that the common craftsmen have prepared. Warning that it is terrible in every respect, he urges Theseus not to see it. Theseus, however, says that if the craftsman's intentions are dutiful, there will be something of merit in the play no matter how poor the performance. The lords and ladies take their seats, and Quince enters to present a prologue, which he speaks haltingly. His strange pauses put the meaning of his words in question, so that he says, "Our true intent is all for your delight / we are not here. That you should here repent you, though he means to communicate that our true intent is all for your delight. We are not here that you should hear repent you, the 114-115. The other players then enter, including two characters performing the roles of Wall and Moonshine. They act out a clumsy version of the story, during which the noblemen and women joke among themselves about the actors' strange speeches and misapprehensions. Bottom, in particular, makes many perplexing statements while playing Pyramus, such as "I see a voice. I can hear my Thisbe's face," the 190-191. Pyramus and Thisbe meet at, and speak across, the actor playing Wall, who holds up his fingers to indicate a chink. Snug, as the lion, enters and pours forth a speech explaining to the ladies that he is not really a lion. He roars, scaring Thisbe away, and clumsily rends her mantle. Finding the bloody mantle, Pyramus duly commits suicide. Thisbe does likewise when she finds her Pyramus dead. After the conclusion of the play, during which Bottom pretends to kill himself, with a cry of "Die, die, 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 die," Bottom asks if the audience would like an epilogue or a Bergamask dance. Theseus replies that they will see the dance, the 295. Bottom and Flute perform the dance, and the whole group exits for bed. Puck enters and says that, now that night has fallen, the fairies will come to the castle, and that he has been sent with broom before / to sweep the dust behind the door, v.ii.19-20. Oberon and Tritania enter and bless the palace and its occupants with a fairy song, so that the lovers will always be true to one another, their children will be beautiful, and no harm will ever visit Theseus and Hippolyta. Oberon and Tritania take their leave, and Puck makes a final address to the audience. He says that if the play has offended, the audience should remember it simply as a dream. He wishes the audience members good night and asks them to give him their hands in applause if they are kind friends. The structure of A Midsummer Night's Dream is somewhat compacted in that the first 4 acts contain all of the play's main action, with the height of conflict occurring in Act 3 and a happy turn of events resembling a conclusion in Act IV. Act V serves as a kind of joyful comic epilogue to the rest of the play, focusing on the craftsmen's hilariously bungling efforts to present their play and on the noble Athenians' good-natured jesting during the craftsmen's performance. The heady tragedy of Pyramus and Thisbe becomes comical in the hands of the craftsmen. The bearded flute's portrayal of the maiden Thisbe as well as the melodramatic "Thou Wall, O sweet and lovely Wall" and nonsensical "Sweet Moon, I thank thee for thy sunny beams" language of the play strips the performance of any seriousness or profound meaning. The 174, the 261. The story of Pyramus and Thisbe, which comes from an ancient Babylonian legend often reworked in European mythology, would have been familiar to educated members of Shakespeare's audiences. The story likely influenced Romeo and Juliet, although Shakespeare also pulled elements from other versions of the Romeo and Juliet tale. In both stories, 2 young lovers from feuding families communicate under cover of darkness. Both male lovers erroneously think their beloved's dead and commit suicide, and both females do likewise when they find their lovers dead. The most influential writer in all of English literature, William Shakespeare, was born in 1564 to a successful middle-class glove maker in Stratford-upon-Avon, England. Shakespeare attended grammar school, but his formal education proceeded no further. In 1582 he married an older woman, Anne Hathaway, and had 3 children with her. Around 1590 he left his family behind and traveled to London to work as an actor and playwright. Public and critical success quickly followed, and Shakespeare eventually became the most popular playwright in England and part owner of the Globe Theatre. His career bridged the reigns of Elizabeth I, ruled 1558 to 1603, and James I, ruled 1603 to 1625, and he was a favorite of both monarchs. Indeed, James granted Shakespeare's company the greatest possible compliment by bestowing upon its members the title of King's Men. Wealthy and renowned, Shakespeare retired to Stratford and died in 1616 at the age of 52. At the time of Shakespeare's death, literary luminaries such as Ben Jonson hailed his works as timeless. Shakespeare's works were collected and printed in various editions in the century following his death, and by the early 18th century his reputation as the greatest poet ever to write in English was well established. The unprecedented admiration garnered by his works led to a fierce curiosity about Shakespeare's life, but the dearth of biographical information has left many details of Shakespeare's personal history shrouded in mystery. Some people have concluded from this fact that Shakespeare's plays were really written by someone else. Francis Bacon and the Earl of Oxford are the two most popular candidates, but the support for this claim is overwhelmingly circumstantial, and the theory is not taken seriously by many scholars. In the absence of credible evidence to the contrary, Shakespeare must be viewed as the author of the 37 plays and 154 sonnets that bear his name. The legacy of this body of work is immense. A number of Shakespeare's plays seem to have transcended even the category of brilliance, becoming so influential as to profoundly affect the course of Western literature and culture ever after. Written in the mid-1590s, probably shortly before Shakespeare turned to Romeo and Juliet, A Midsummer Night's Dream is one of his strangest and most delightful creations, and it marks a departure from his earlier works and from others of the English Renaissance. The play demonstrates both the extent of Shakespeare's learning and the expansiveness of his imagination. The range of references in the play is among its most extraordinary attributes. Shakespeare draws on sources as various as Greek mythology. The Zeus, for instance, is loosely based on the Greek hero of the same name, and the play is peppered with references to Greek gods and goddesses. English country fairy lore. The character of Puck, or Robin Goodfellow, was a popular figure in 16th century stories. And the theatrical practices of Shakespeare's London. The Craftsman's play refers to and parodies many conventions of English Renaissance theatre, such as men playing the roles of women. Further, many of the characters are drawn from diverse texts. Titania comes from Ovid's Metamorphoses, and Oberon may have been taken from the medieval romance Juan of Bordeaux, translated by Lord Berners in the mid-1530s. Unlike the plots of many of Shakespeare's plays, however, the story in A Midsummer Night's Dream seems not to have been drawn from any particular source, but rather to be the original product of the playwright's imagination. Although Puck and Bottom stand out as the most personable characters in A Midsummer Night's Dream, they themselves are not involved in the main dramatic events. Of the other characters, Helena, the Levesic young woman desperately in love with Demetrius, is perhaps the most fully drawn. Among the quartet of Athenian lovers, Helena is the one who thinks most about the nature of love, which makes sense, given that at the beginning of the play she is left out of the love triangle involving Lysander, Hermia, and Demetrius. She says, "Love looks not with the eyes, but with the mind," believing that Demetrius has built up a fantastic notion of Hermia's beauty that prevents him from recognizing Helena's own beauty. 234. Utterly faithful to Demetrius despite her recognition of his shortcomings, Helena sets out to win his love by telling him about the plan of Lysander and Hermia to elope into the forest. Once Helena enters the forest, Many of her traits are drawn out by the confusion that the love potion engenders. Compared to the other lovers, she is extremely unsure of herself, worrying about her appearance and believing that Lysander is mocking her when he declares his love for her. Whereas Puck's humor is often mischievous and subtle, the comedy surrounding the overconfident Weaver Nick Bottom is hilariously overt. The central figure in the subplot involving the craftsman's production of the Paramus and Thisbe story, Bottom dominates his fellow actors with an extraordinary belief in his own abilities. He thinks he is perfect for every part in the play and his comical incompetence. He is a terrible actor and frequently makes rhetorical and grammatical mistakes in his speech. The humor surrounding Bottom often stems from the fact that he is totally unaware of his own ridiculousness. His speeches are overdramatic and self-aggrandizing, and he seems to believe that everyone takes him as seriously as he does himself. This foolish self-importance reaches its pinnacle after Puck transforms Bottom's head into that of an ass. When Titania, whose eyes have been anointed with a love potion, falls in love with the now ass-headed Bottom, he believes that the devotion of the beautiful, magical fairy queen is nothing out of the ordinary and that all of the trappings of her affection, including having servants attend him, are his proper due. His unawareness of the fact that his head has been transformed into that of an ass parallels his inability to perceive the absurdity of the idea that Titania could fall in love with him. Theseus, Duke of Athens, is preparing for his marriage to Hippolyta, Queen of the Amazons, with a 4-day festival of pomp and entertainment. He commissions his master of the revels, Philostrate, to find suitable amusements for the occasion. Egus, an Athenian nobleman, marches into Theseus's court with his daughter, Hermia, and 2 young men, Demetrius and Lysander. Egus wishes Hermia to marry Demetrius, who loves Hermia, but Hermia is in love with Lysander and refuses to comply. Egus asks for the full penalty of law to fall on Hermia's head if she flouts her father's will. Theseus gives Hermia until his wedding to consider her options, warning her that disobeying her father's wishes could result in her being sent to a convent or even executed. Nonetheless, Hermia and Lysander plan to escape Athens the following night and marry in the house of Lysander's aunt, some 7 leagues distant from the city. They make their intentions known to Hermia's friend Helena, who was once engaged to Demetrius and still loves him even though he jilted her after meeting Hermia. Hoping to regain his love, Helena tells Demetrius of the elopement that Hermia and Lysander have planned. At the appointed time, Demetrius stalks into the woods after his intended bride and her lover. Helena follows behind him. In these same woods are 2 very different groups of characters. The first is a band of fairies, including Oberon, the fairy king, and Titania, his queen, who has recently returned from India to bless the marriage of Theseus and Hippolyta. The second is a band of Athenian craftsmen rehearsing a play that they hope to perform for the Duke and his bride. Oberon and Titania are at odds over a young Indian prince given to Titania by the prince's mother. The boy is so beautiful that Oberon wishes to make him a knight, but Titania refuses. Seeking revenge, Oberon sends his merry servant, Puck, to acquire a magical flower, the juice of which can be spread over a sleeping person's eyelids, to make that person fall in love with the first thing he or she sees upon waking. Puck obtains the flower, and Oberon tells him of his plan to spread its juice on the sleeping Titania's eyelids. Having seen Demetrius act cruelly toward Helena, he orders Puck to spread some of the juice on the eyelids of the young Athenian man. Puck encounters Lysander and Hermia. Thinking that Lysander is the Athenian of whom Oberon spoke, Puck afflicts him with the love potion. Lysander happens to see Helena upon awaking and falls deeply in love with her, abandoning Hermia. As the night progresses and Puck attempts to undo his mistake, Both Lysander and Demetrius end up in love with Helena, who believes that they are mocking her. Hermia becomes so jealous that she tries to challenge Helena to a fight. Demetrius and Lysander nearly do fight over Helena's love, but Puck confuses them by mimicking their voices, leading them apart until they are lost separately in the forest. When Titania wakes, the first creature she sees is Bottom, the most ridiculous of the Athenian craftsmen, whose head Puck has mockingly transformed into that of an ass. Titania passes a ludicrous interlude doting on the ass-headed weaver. Eventually, Oberon obtains the Indian boy. Puck spreads the love potion on Lysander's eyelids, and by morning all is well. Theseus and Hippolyta discover the sleeping lovers in the forest and take them back to Athens to be married. Demetrius now loves Helena, and Lysander now loves Hermia. After the group wedding, the lovers watch Bottom and his fellow craftsmen perform their play, a fumbling, hilarious version of the story of Paramus and Thisbe. When the play is completed, the lovers go to bed. The fairies briefly emerge to bless the sleeping couples with a protective charm and then disappear. Only Puck remains, to ask the audience for its forgiveness and approval and to urge it to remember the play as though it had all been a dream. Though there is little character development in A Midsummer Night's Dream and no true protagonist, critics generally point to Puck as the most important character in the play. The mischievous, quick-witted sprite sets many of the play's events in motion with his magic, by means of both deliberate pranks on the human characters, transforming Bottom's head into that of an ass, and unfortunate mistakes, smearing the love potion on Lysander's eyelids instead of Demetrius's. More important, Puck's capricious spirit, magical fancy, fun-loving humor, and lovely, evocative language permeate the atmosphere of the play. Wild contrasts, such as the implicit comparison between the rough, earthy craftsmen and the delicate, graceful fairies, dominate A Midsummer Night's Dream. Puck seems to illustrate many of these contrasts within his own character. He is graceful but not so saccharine as the other fairies. As Oberon's jester, he is given to a certain coarseness, which leads him to transform Bottom's head into that of an ass merely for the sake of enjoyment. He is good-hearted but capable of cruel tricks. Finally, whereas most of the fairies are beautiful and ethereal, Puck is often portrayed as somewhat bizarre-looking. Indeed, another fairy mentions that some call Puck a hobgoblin, a term whose connotations are decidedly less glamorous than those of fairy. II.40.